I really want Mark Cuban to retweet today's podcast, which might not be as unrealistic as it seems, because just yesterday he retweeted a story about today's guest, Liam Porr, who recently made national headlines and got outlets to cover him, such as MIT Press, Business Insider, Hacker News, major outlets with millions of readers, because he used an AI software called GPT-3 to create an entire blog of AI-generated content, which got to the top of Tech Radar and was indistinguishable from human writing to a lot of people. What Liam did is a testament to the power of contemporary AI, and we talked about that. We talked about the implications this has for individuals, for corporations, for society, and where this might go in the future, as well as the man behind the story. So, welcome to today's episode. Welcome to the podcast, episode 2 of the 21st Century Talks podcast. And remember to share today's episode on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, wherever your communities reside. And today's hosts are myself, Colin Snell, and my good friend and blog's primary science and physics writer, Elliot Lair. I hope you guys really enjoyed today's episode. I know I had a lot of fun creating it. So have a good listen, and I'll see you guys back here next Friday.
Well, I guess my first question is, who are you? Yeah, tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do.
Sure. I'm a incoming senior computer science student at UC Berkeley. I am from a small town in South Texas, and I ended up coming to the West Coast for college. Always been really interested in technology, and I always wanted to be an engineer for a long time. Anyway, ended up coming here and doing computer science, and it's been a lot of fun. But I kind of have recently drifted away towards more towards business and entrepreneurship, and I've been less inclined towards being an engineer in my career. Anyway, so part of that was I just started wanting to write online, and just how I ended up coming into ended up starting this project. But basically, yeah, I'm a computer science student. In terms of stuff I do at Berkeley, I'm involved in some organizations and clubs. Some oriented around technology, some not. I'm also in a fraternity. I'm actually the president of a fraternity, and so it's a cool mix of things. And I think that's about a good overview.
So we're doing this interview because in the last week and a half, 2 weeks, you have gotten some popularity on different tech related websites online for a really interesting project you did related to an AI system called GPT-3.
Right.
So can you, first off, just really quickly for the people who might not know what it is, quickly give a summary of what GPT-3 is and what your project that got you so much popularity is?
Sure. So GPT-3, in I guess simple terms, is basically a text completion AI. So it's a natural language processing algorithm. It deals with language, and you basically, the way you work with it is you give it a piece of text, and it tries to complete the text in whatever way it seems fit. So if you give it a prompt, it tries to answer the prompt. If you've asked a question, and maybe it'll answer the question, maybe it won't. And it basically just tries to generate text from input text. And that's basically a good way to describe it. And the reason it's gotten a lot of popularity recently because it's kind of, to a lot of people, seems like a big step in terms of quality. This isn't a new technology. It's basically like a remixed version of one that they released a year ago. Yeah. But it has, for some reason, it is much better than it was before, and it's gotten to a point where people are like, wow, this is legit. This is something we can use now. Because before it was just kind of rambly and something that just was not very useful, and it was kind of funny to watch that it tried to make language that was readable, but it was never anything useful. And now we're getting to the point where it's actually something that is feasible and useful.
Yeah, and GPT-3's predecessor, GPT-2, is it's currently open to the public, right? And GPT-3 is not.
No.
So when it came to you getting access to it for the blog project, like how did you get access to it? How long did it take you to kind of set up and actually get the website built and all the text generated?
So it was a pretty easy process. I was involved in the machine learning community here at Cal for a little while. And so I basically just reached out to people that I knew because I know there's a lot of people who are very, very smart machine learning, either researchers or PhD students, and they have a lot of connections. I knew that there was going to be people that had access to it. So I just reached out, and I ended up finding somebody that was willing to help me out. And it was really easy to set up. It took me just a couple hours to set up the website and start generating text and posting it online. I didn't build the website myself. I used a service called Substack, which is dead simple to use. It's basically a newsletter blogging website that you just upload documents and it formats it all for you and sends it to an email newsletter that you have.
Damn, that's fascinating. So it took a couple hours maximum. On one of the articles I read online, I'm pretty sure it was from The Verge, they said that it took from you first getting access to it to you actually doing this, it was like or maybe even first hearing about GPT-3, it was a week. It was about a week of actual like encountering it, or like how long do you have to actually like work with GPT-3 before you're able to get to the point where you had it generating an entire website worth of content?
So I was basically just generating. All I would do is write a bunch of prompts, and then I would have it generate output from those prompts. I would pick the best ones for each prompt, and I would post a couple of them a day. It was super simple, and so I came up with the idea, and I started posting stuff basically like the next day, and then after a little over a week, I had 50 subscribers, and then I went for another week. I had like close to 70. And it was growing fairly linearly in terms of the people who were following it. And I was like, okay, this is legitimate. It was not very difficult.
Wow, that's that. Is that nerve-wracking for you? Like, because it was not that difficult, and this is, GPT-3 is light years ahead of what GPT-2 and other current AI software, and which in part is because of the amount of data I had access to comb over and learn from, right?
Sure.
Maybe the next iteration, the next generation of it is going to be so powerful. Do you think it's going to put writers out of jobs? Maybe not journalists, but at least the content farms and the content bloggers. Like, do you see it realistically doing that?
In some sense, yeah. I think that it is definitely got basically. I mean, like for instance, sports writing. A lot of sports writing from the Associated Press is already automated using natural language processing.
Yeah.
And that sort of thing will just accelerate, and it will gain more traction amongst different media companies. So a lot of the content that people are making right now can certainly be replaced by an AI. Now, when you have journalism, you have an added element of you actually have to perform an interview. Now, that's not to say that the AI couldn't do an interview at some time in the future. If you're doing it over text, I think it certainly could do an interview quite well, and people have experimented with that. But that's more in the future. I think in terms of a lot of the content on websites like BuzzFeed and other media companies, I think that a lot of it could be written by an AI, and pretty easily. It's basically just an efficiency thing, and that's how it's going to start at the beginning. It's just going to be the companies are looking for ways to produce more content more efficiently with less employees, and then they'll try to experiment with it in that way. And then once the technology gets better, slowly the writers will be faded out. I don't think it'll be like a quick adoption. I think it's more likely that there'll just be another media company that comes out and decides that another media company will be an early adopter to the technology, and because they'll be able to produce a lot more content with a lot less people and a lot less expense, they'll end up just overtaking the traditional media companies that don't adopt this sort of thing.
Are you familiar with Steve Case, one of the founders of AOL? He has a book called The Third Wave.
I'm familiar. I've heard of the book, but I'm not familiar with the author.
So Elliot and me were talking about it a few days ago, and it's what Steve Case outlines is that when it comes to the internet, there are three waves of innovation, right? The first wave was IBM and Microsoft in the early 80s, 90s, and early 2000s, setting up the substructure of technology potential, right?
Yeah.
And that had a lot of money. There was a lot of hardware, a lot of software. And then there was the second wave, which was social medias in the beginning stages of integration of this new technology we call the internet. Right. And now we're at a point where we're entering the third wave, which is the internet becoming integrated into intimate aspects of our lives, whether it's dating apps or banking or all these new applications that are coming out. Each time, progressively, there's more investment, there's more potential, and there's better technology. And I strongly feel like AI is still potentially at the phase of maybe 1, maybe 2. But how many years, if you had to give your best guess, when it comes to technologies like GPT-3, how many years until you realistically see it entering that stage 3? And also, do you have any personal interest in being there when it does, and still working in the field when it does? What do you want to do in the future with machine learning from this project you did?
Yeah, I would first preface this with I'm probably the least qualified person to answer this question.
Yeah.
I'm not an AI expert by any means. I'm merely a lowly computer science student, and I understand a little bit about how it works, but enough to be able to work with it easily and understand how I could work with it and play with it. But in terms of like, in a lot of ways, the internet is still in its infancy in a lot of ways, and by that I mean it just has not reached a level of legitimacy and structure that we kind of need. All that stuff is still being built. And AI is the same thing. It's just even younger. So there still needs to be a lot of regulation and whatnot around it. And it's going to gradually, as the technology gets better, it's going to be structured in our lives more and more, and is going to be a part of our society in a lot of ways. Via our industries will rely on it for the economy. And so in terms of how many years, I mean, in a lot of ways, it's being, I don't know, maybe within, I think what I do think is that within the next 5 to 10 years, we're going to see a lot more jobs being taken by artificial intelligence, which is not, that's not a news. People are already expecting that. It's just that now that we have people like writers who are in the creative sector, who previously did not think that they would be vulnerable to this kind of thing, who are now starting to sweat bullets because it seems possible.
Yeah,
and it seems like
demonstrating that.
And it seems like you don't even need CS experts, as you were mentioning, to get GPT-3 to work effectively, right? No, what do you think the barrier to entry is? Can we have the average mom and pop shop putting out this quality of content within the next few years?
You don't need qualifications. The only reason I was the one that did this is because I'm a computer science student and I had access to people who have access to it. Yeah. And it's dead simple to use. And the only reason it's not being this use case isn't more widespread at the moment is because it's the access is barred. And so it's not a matter of technical sophistication. It's a matter of being able to have basic understanding of technology, like how to use a phone. It's about that level of sophistication.
And if the barrier entry is that low, the open. Did I cut out there?
Yeah, I cut out. You can keep going.
Okay. If the barrier to entry is that low, the OpenAI team decided to not release GPT-2 publicly due to safety concerns, right? But then on GPT-3, they have this mindset of having an API and potentially monetizing public access. Yeah. Do you think that's safe? Do you think that that sort of company should be able to have these massive changes in how people are operating things like writing?
Yeah, I think what they're doing right now is extremely temporary. Basically, they as a company, when GPT-2 came out and they had some controversy that arose whenever people understood that you could start using this for bias, radicalization, astroturfing, malicious things, they smartly became more cautious about releasing something that's this powerful and useful to the public before they understood what the use cases would be and how people would try to mistreat it. Which is kind of the goal of the project that I was doing, regardless of how you may feel about how I got access to it and how I went about it. It was a use case that people will do, and I was just merely trying to point it out. But they did that, and it was smart. But this is extremely temporary, and they're just basically, if I were them, I would be using this to figure out how we should try and control the technology. How should we go about releasing to the public and regulating it? I think a lot of it's just so that we can get attention around the AI and its use cases so we can get more regulation. I think that because that's a very slow process and it needs to happen. But ultimately it's temporary. This is technology. They've written papers about the technology. So at an algorithmic level, even if they don't offer the code and the implementation to the public, the general understanding of how it works is out there. And it's only a matter of time before, if, for instance, OpenAI continues to relinquish access to it, it's only a matter of time before somebody else builds something very similar at similar sophistication and releases that to the public. Again, only a matter of time. What they're doing right now is smart because they should be trying to figure out ways to do it more safely. I don't think it would be very smart to just release this to the public. But again, it's just a matter of time before this access does get to the public. It's just because they're the leading edge. They have a little bit more control over it because they were the first pioneers in building it.
Mm. Did you get your access revoked after this story came to light?
So again, I don't have personal access. It was a PhD student that I was working with. He does not seem very concerned, and I know he doesn't have access revoked. I've not disclosed his identity because I don't want him to get negative attention from it.
Right.
But he doesn't seem super worried. He was very excited about the article. In fact, he thought it was very cool.
Has anyone from the GPT-3 team reached out to you so far?
No.
Okay, that's good.
I still don't have access, which is annoying. I was hoping that this would be hey, I have legitimate use cases for this. Can I please get access and do more stuff with it? Unfortunately, I think that they took it. They didn't take it very well because it doesn't shine. I think it just doesn't shine the technology in the best light. They want to show off, good use cases for engineers and stuff like that. They've been very vocal about publicizing use cases. For instance, some people were using it to automate code generation and stuff like that. And that's the kind of stuff they want to promote. But the negative use cases, and whether or not you think of what I did was a negative use case is, it's fuzzy. But to them, it's not as good for them to promote that kind of activity as it would be to promote other better looking use cases.
Well, I think. Oh, sorry, go on.
No, just basically. So that's my guess as to why they have not allowed me access or responded to any of my emails or inquiries, of which there are many. One of
the tricky things is the fact that even if what you're doing can be seen by them as a negative use case, that's still a favor to the collective population and to us as a whole, because you're showing how this can be used in a way that isn't just for engineering, right?
Yeah.
And so, which means that the big issue with AI and other similar technologies that we haven't ever we can't conceptualize easily as a society, and a lot of our top scientists can't project where it's going to be in a certain number of years, right?
Right.
The big issue is it's a black box. In addition to being a black box and not knowing precisely how it works, every time we use it or create a better version, we're reaching our hand into a pool of marbles, and one or two of them might be potentially disastrous for our civilization. So by you showing what you can do with this, I genuinely think you're doing a noble service, right? I genuinely think, in addition to it being presumably really fun and really interesting, right? It's you demonstrating a insufficiency in our ability to actually respond to this, both economically, societally, and probably legislatively, right? So I think because of that, it's a really big plus.
Yeah, so that's what I told them, but they didn't seem to care very much.
They had other ideas.
Yeah, so unfortunately, that's just how it's going to be. I'm not going to be the only one showing off use cases similar to this that may not be, ideal uses of the technology, but it's ultimately once the technology is out there, people are going to use it however they want. And so yeah.
I was curious. So it seems like one of the largest differences between GPT-3 and other past natural language processing projects is actually just that GPT-3 has 10 times the parameter capacity.
Yeah.
Right. And so it almost seems like we're not necessarily doing anything completely out of the blue. It's a matter of scale. And if people just get this scale up, continue to use larger data banks of English words and continue more amounts of training, is there a capacity to the extent that AI emulates human language?
Yeah. So I think that, again, not an AI expert here, not extremely well versed in NLP, but from what I understand, this seems like more like the exception than the rule. The fact that GPT-3 is so much like it's actually extremely surprising that GPT-3 seems so much better, and so much more sophisticated than GPT-2 with basically only a parameter increase. I think that people were very surprised by that, and I think that scale is extremely limited. I think that they're not going to be able to get much more out of it without changing the way that the algorithm, like changing the algorithm basically. There needs to be innovation at a deeper level. So as much as I think it would be nice for them to try and just bump up the parameters from like 10 billion to 20 to 200 billion, and maybe it'll be better, I doubt it'll be that much better. So I think that innovation will happen, but I don't think it's going to work. It's not quite, just revving up the engine like that.
So recently we've seen, I don't know, the last few years, different artists have used different AI softwares and programs to generate art, and it's in some cases has been beautiful. It's been something that, like, even though it doesn't necessarily have meaning, because meaning relates to consciousness, like it still is art and can be interpreted that way. A lot of the writing from GPT-3, as well as obviously GPT-2 in the past, that we have seen, it's not like it's breaking new ground. It's not like it's not like you read it as like I'm going to discover new knowledge through reading this thing. Like from the work that you did with GPT-3, do you think, were you surprised with the quality? Did you say, like, did any of the things that it produced make you go, oh, this is like an actual piece of like something I would read for fun or read to actually learn something? Or did it just kind of feel like, somewhat elegant writing that kind of beat around the bush in some places and kind of felt like it was, just some content mill production?
Yeah, so I'll say definitely at the beginning, when you're first trying to play around with it and you see what it can do, it's very surprising. You're like, wow, these insights make sense, and they're actually it's taking a new approach on something that I have not thought of before. And so it's very interesting when you look at it that way at the very beginning. And it has a way of being rational, and sometimes it's able to even like circle back on topics that it touches on before and develop arguments. Sometimes it's not, again, it's not the best at that, but sometimes it does it, and you're like, you have a very strange feeling whenever you read it, especially at first. After a while, especially when you're like what I was doing, you're just trying to promote it. You look more into the flaws than you do at the what it's capable of. You begin to take those things for granted, but at the beginning, it's definitely very interesting to see how it's able to have pretty rational and sophisticated insights on human problems, or problems in general, but especially the human ones are the weirdest ones, because it's not a human writing about it. It's a robot, of course. And that brings up a whole host of weird ethical questions, like, how do I value a piece of text that's written about human problems, but by a robot? Especially if that writing is better than an actual human's writing. Beats me. I mean, a lot of it is like, there is an argument to be said that, it's just taking written word from real humans and synthesizing it in a particular way. But whether that makes it a novel idea or not is a different question. Yeah, majorly. And I mean, it's novel or not, the important factor is that it still got some people to think that it was written by a person, right? I think that's the most important thing. It's the and that's the primary test when it comes to the not usefulness, but the intelligence of an actual system, right? And I think that which is very anthropocentric, but anyways, but given that it did convince people, and you did get press coverage from it, like, I guess twofold. What was it like getting all of that media attention for this project? And beyond that, how do you feel they are covering you? Are there any things about the way that they're covering the AI or what you did that you think is either alarm or has larger implications? So going viral on something like that it's a weird experience. And I have mixed feelings about it. I mean, obviously it's been good in a lot of ways. Like, brought me a lot of opportunities that I wouldn't have access to before. So in that respect, I'm very grateful. But when the experience of actually seeing it get written and seeing people write about me and then talk about you on the internet when they don't know you, they know nothing about you, they know that you've done this one thing, is very interesting and strange. I found that there are some people on the internet that are just unnecessarily aggressive for whatever reason. But there's also a lot of people who applaud it and they think it's cool. And it's very interesting to see that. Like Mark Cuban tweeted about the article like yesterday, and I thought that was a weird experience too. I thought that was really cool,
man.
Thanks. I mean, yeah, it's cool. It's neat.
Yeah.
And it's invigorating to be able to see that, you know, people care about something that I did. And that I was able to prove a point and people endorse what I had done and think it's a good idea. So that's very cool. But, you know, there's a lot of things like, I think at the beginning, there was a lot of people who kept calling me like a growth hacker and stuff like that. And it's weird to feel categorized in that way when I don't think that's what I am. But, you know, so I had to refrain from trying to defend myself too much. I think I was just don't think about it. Just let people talk and then leave it as it is. I feel, you know, and it's good to take criticism as well when it's valid criticism and giving people credit where, you know, when they have good points. But yeah, it's been a weird experience. You know, very kind of emotional in a lot of ways, but
yeah,
getting used to it.
Is a lot of the way that you've seen it been covered so far relate to, like, do you think a lot of the articles you read, I'm not asking for specific names, but are some of the articles that you've read about yourself so far, do any of them kind of stand out as particularly careful when it comes to actually covering the right aspects of this, right?
Yes,
obviously,
yes,
there's a way to cover this, which is like, look at this great new technology and it can inspire a bunch of copycats and, you know, all these other things versus like, be like, this is what this actually means for our society and for this technology.
Yeah, so definitely. I was very lucky in that I had an extremely good journalist reach out to me whenever this was going on. So the article that caused this, I mean, like the thing I wrote, the blog post I wrote about the reveal got a lot of, you know, it went relatively viral. And then that's what caught the attention of the reporter from the MIT Technology Review, Karen Howe. I'm probably butchering her last name, but she was the journalist that had reached out. And I was lucky in that she is an extremely competent journalist who really cares about getting to the core of the problem and the message and the meaning behind it instead of just labeling it as something. And she did an excellent job, especially because there was like some people who had criticisms over it, and she defended the article very well, and just basically focusing on what the core of the article was supposed to be about and the message behind it. And so I was very lucky to have a extremely good and competent journalist writing the article about me.
That's good to know.
I'm just curious. So in some of the comments sections on your blog, there were people actually saying things like, I think this is written by GPT-3. Yeah. And your blog community members were really opposed to that idea, like absolutely trashing people who brought that notion up.
Yeah.
What did you like? Did you at any point like feel like messaging those people saying like, actually, hey, you found me out, or and what even went into you deciding when to reveal?
Yeah, so I did not feel good about that. I mean, obviously, it is kind of funny. Like just because it's ironic that, you know, people. I mean, like obviously, yes, people. When people said it, they the other commenters or viewers or whatever had seen it as an insult because, you know, to be compared to a machine, I guess at this point is like an insult, maybe not for long. But you know, I did not feel good in that because it really brought to light the fact that I was just fooling people, and that's not something I feel good about. I don't like feeling like I'm a fraud, like being a fraud or whatever. So that's why I was just like, I'm just going to keep this going as long as I can to prove that it can work. And then I'm going to reveal it. And that's basically what I did. If I really wanted to, I could have continued this for 3 months or so and gotten hundreds of subscribers and then revealed it then. I didn't want to do that because I didn't feel good, you know, feeling that I was like fooling people. So I, you know, in terms of reaching out, I knew I couldn't do that because it's the AI's blog. I got to let the AI do its thing for a while, and then once time comes, I will reveal it. I also just didn't want to interfere in the process. I wanted to know what what happens. Like, how do people react to this kind of thing? So that was my thinking behind it.
And really, you were the first to really effectively fool the public, I think. Especially seen by how much backlash there was to even suggesting that your blogs were written by GPT-3. Yeah. Do you think now that this has come to light, it actually just changes how maybe the entire public looks at works that are written like this? Definitely. Do you think there's something totally different to how we think about attribution now?
Yeah. So in terms of attribution, I think people are going to be a lot more suspicious after this. And because people are going to be a lot more suspicious, it's going to be a lot harder for an up-and-coming writer to get attention online, I think that the kind of people who do this kind of thing are going to cause the internet to have what is already an abundant amount of useless information to continue to be more abundant, useless information. And because of that, there's going to be a lot more, people are going to rely a lot more on reputation and writing quality. And for somebody, when you're trying to become a writer, you don't just miraculously become a great writer. The way you become a good writer is by writing. And so whenever you want, writing a ton. And so for someone who's just starting, it'll be a lot harder. The barrier to entry is basically just going to be a lot higher. You're going to have to be a much better writer just going into it, which is going to make it harder for people to write online in the future.
As well as a much better marketer, right? You have to be able to cater to the right audiences. And I think that, a potential implication of this is that, as things like this continue to happen, because I full-heartedly think that, your project is the first of many that are going to do this similar thing. You're going to have more and more copycats and more people who are focused on, just optimizing their SEO, optimizing how great their websites are actually ranking, as well as how much content they're able to get out there. And the internet's existing tendency towards producing trash, if it makes bucks, is only going to get exacerbated, like you were saying, which is a scary thought, right? It's like, how does that actually change, the number of people who are actually trying to get a voice out there, right? How does that actually affect how people communicate ideas that are, essential to get out there? Because it's not like there's not already a bunch of really terrible ideas out there online, That's fascinating. That's fascinating.
And it's really interesting too, because it's really hard to there's probably people who believe that there's suddenly going to be an influx of technology that tries to solve this issue by somehow verifying that it's a human writer behind the work, and which is good in theory, but I think it is actually going to be really hard to implement, because half of the argument behind my article was it doesn't have to be, especially right now when the technology is good but not quite there. It doesn't have to be the article, the AI writing the whole article. You could use it as a starting point. You just kind of shepherd the argument into something that's better. All it takes is like a human editor to go through, change a couple things, cut some stuff out, add a conclusion, and then bam, you have a good article. But it only half resembles what the original text was. But then that's still an AI writing half of it and increasing your efficiency by a lot. How do you verify whether or not that was a human writer or not? And so I lost my train of thought. But anyway, so you could use it as a way to make your writing more efficient. And it makes it very difficult to differentiate.
And I mean, we almost had this entire process starting with things like Photoshop and then entering into deepfakes, and now we have written text that's indistinguishable. Like forensic investigators are having a really tough job right now. Do you think at some point we just give up on the notion of distinguishing whether something is human versus computer created?
Yeah, I don't know. I think right now it is easier to do because OpenAI has a kind of monopoly over it, and they could implement ways in which to kind of detect that kind of stuff. Do I think it's totally useless? No, because I know there's a lot of people out there that are a lot smarter than me that can probably figure out something pretty clever. But I remember what I was going to say earlier. I got a lot of criticism on the article because I had mentioned in it that I had edited some parts. Now, the edits that I made were very small. if I, I could publish all the text that I had, but all I was doing was, for instance, the one I mentioned in the article, there was an Emerson quote attributed to, they had attributed a Bob Dylan quote to Emerson. I was like, I can't include that. That's a dead giveaway. There's some other times where like there was just blatant grammatical errors. I had to change the tense of a text or something like that. Or there was, one or two times where it was like 2 + 2 = 5. I'm like, I can't do that kind of stuff. So it was never additive. It was always subtractive. It was like, I just need to cut out this little sentence, blah, blah, blah. But it still raises the question. It's like, it doesn't have to be, that whole argument, just the criticism defeats the purpose of the article. The point of the article isn't that the AI can write a perfect article that can get a bunch of attention. It's that you can use it to pump out blog content, even if it is very mediocre, and get good results from that. Basically just an efficiency improvement.
Yeah, and I think it's also it's an efficiency improvement to other areas in addition to just online content, right? Like, how does this affect education? When things become open source or perhaps paid behind a paywall to get access, the ability to do a similar thing to what you did. How many middle schoolers, how many high schoolers, if it becomes that easy, how many clever college kids in the next 5 years are going to get their hands on and go, oh, I actually don't have to write that final paper.
Yeah, exactly. That itself is like, I have no idea how that's going to be addressed other than just like regulating access to it.
How are employers going to know we're actually writing our own documents and memos? Like it totally changes. But I think in that, which I think is one of the larger potential positive implications of AI, is like within that, it also gives people time to focus on the parts of work that's actual, creativeness, that's actual creating something novel, right? And so maybe the step technology, in addition to all the struggles that's going to put us up against the next, coming decades, we're also going to have the profound opportunity to fundamentally shift how we interact with work. Totally. What that actually means, what it actually looks like to do that. When you don't have to do 12 hours worth of memos, and you can just go straight to the how can we improve the company, what does it actually look like? It changes employees' relationships to their employers.
Definitely.
Which, I mean, obviously there's the whole issue of, the author Yuval Harari talks a little bit about this, of the issue of the redundant class of workers who no longer have to produce as much as they did before, and all these political implications of that. But I think at the end of the day, it's a massive opportunity as much as it is a potential risk,
Yeah.
And I think,
Yeah, so I definitely think that there, as frustrating as it seems to talk about all the job losses that could occur, there is a lot. It could be very useful for a lot of people. For instance, I have friends who own companies, and those companies are. I have a friend who works on this coffee company called Coca Brew, and they are a bottled beverage espresso company. And part of what they do is this thing called content marketing. And basically is they write content on the internet that, discusses coffee related topics. And that is a way to get better add legitimacy to your brand and drive people towards your product. But they're not writers. They don't like writing. They want to build this coffee company. They want to focus on the coffee and the beverage and making it a good value product for people. If they could figure out a way to have something else write the blogs for them, that is a huge plus because it saves them a ton of time on something they don't want to deal with. Same thing with a lot of just copywriting and marketing. If you can use the AI to express via the written word the use of your product in a much more efficient and better way than you could, that is a huge time saver for you. But at the same time, it could make it harder for you to stand out because suddenly everybody has access to this kind of stuff.
I worked as a digital marketing contractor for a while last year, and I couldn't agree with you more. The amount of time and actual resources, financial resources from the company that was put into just the content marketing alone, the creation of it was ridiculous, And the end quality is not dissimilar to the stuff that GPT-3 was producing on your website. So that's a massive wake up call specifically for content marketers. And I totally see what you're saying. Yeah.
And there's already several companies that have come, announced launching that are basically directed around this by automating blog content and marketing content.
Smart. God, so brilliant.
What do you think about the fact that OpenAI is a for-profit company? Is that to what extent does that pose problems in the AI community?
I don't have ethical qualms with this. Again, I'm not well versed in the ethics of AI and how this can be problematic. I do have opinions on it. I do think that they are, as a nonprofit, or as a for-profit company, I think what they're doing is a good approach, which is basically they write and develop this technology, they release the algorithms and the papers about how it works at a high level, and then they develop the implementation based off of that, and that is what's proprietary. There's nothing stopping some other company from investing a lot of money and resources and engineering talent into building out an implementation based off of the same algorithm. But that's the investment that they're doing. That's the value that they're adding for you. It's the convenience, because they did the implementation and they have the technology and they have it at scale. And that is more than enough justification to be a for-profit company, in my opinion. Now, if they were keeping all the blueprints, basically, all the technology, all the algorithms as trade secrets, that would be more ethically ambiguous.
Do you think it could perpetuate sort of like wealth divides in the sense that small companies are no longer able to say there's like $100,000 fee and you just get everything like behind what OpenAI produces? Like small companies who have writers aren't going to be able to afford that. Yeah. And instead they're having to pay like five writers, a salary that adds up to way more than this fee. Whereas big companies can just use the forefront technology.
I could 100% see a situation in which, at least in the short run, OpenAI charges an absurd price for access to the API, and smart people figure out how to use this to dramatically increase the efficiency of their marketing. And suddenly you have all these large companies just dominating in terms of marketing. It makes it a lot more difficult for you as a small company to make yourself noticed. And in the short run, that could be problematic, definitely. And by short run, I mean the next couple of years. But I don't think that is something they could sustain. I think that, again, once the technology becomes more public and more widely available, which it will, it's just a matter of time before it becomes cheap enough, that will no longer be an issue.
Yeah, because at first it seems like it's not going to be dissimilar to, let's say a moving company that used horse-drawn carriages at the beginning of the 1900s, or, a couple decades in, having to literally compete with a truck-based, motor engine-based moving company. Like, it's the amount of extra power is going to be massively unfair in this capacity. And it's interesting to me because I think rarely do we have an invention that both increases the barrier to entry potentially increases the barrier of entry to individuals as well as massive companies, right? Yeah. And it's going to be fascinating to see how that intimately, exactly, affects our company.
At this point, it's just a toy for a lot of people, but there's a lot of legitimate use cases, and it's only a matter of time before people begin to take advantage of it. And anybody could have the kind of impact that I'm having without having any technological understanding. And that's kind of the big part about it is that it doesn't require somebody with a bunch of technological sophistication to kind of do this thing. So, basically.
And I think,
sorry. No,
I was going to say, and beyond that, it's fascinating because it's like, obviously, despite the lack of a barrier to entry to use GPT-3 to do exactly what you did, I think just for this project that Elliot and I are working on, right, it's essential, a really big part of it is actually coming to understand the person behind the project, right? The person who's actually demonstrating these things. So even if you aren't an absolute expert in something, still asking those questions and still getting your opinions on those things, reflect a certain level of understanding that other people have, and that generally the field in certain capacities might hold on to, right? But nonetheless, I just appreciate the propensity. So some of the concluding questions I like to ask any of the guests on the podcast.
Sure.
The first one is, and we'll tailor them a little bit to your experience with computer science. I guess the first big one is, are you personally optimistic about how you think everything that we talked about today is going to play out? Or do you have absolutely, are you not even comfortable saying, if you're optimistic or pessimistic? Is it just totally up in the wind?
I would say I'm optimistic. I think it's just like any other leap in technology in that the implications are scary. It's going to change a lot of the ways that we do things, and change is always scary for established folks who are going to be the most vocal about it. But ultimately, I do think it's going to add a lot of value to us. It's only a matter of time before we find out the kind of ways that it can add a lot of value to our society, and make things a lot more efficient and solve problems.
Mm-hmm. And you personally want to continue working with AI and within this field, or do you think it's something that you're going to want to move on from, or perhaps maybe integrate in some portion?
I have no idea. I have no particular bent towards AI. Obviously, having done this, I suddenly have some opportunities to be able to pursue something related towards it. But I have no particular bent towards AI in general, which is another point about it is like I was not I'm not some AI expert. I'm not somebody who is extremely well versed in AI and how it works. Yeah. But I just saw an opportunity from all I needed was a basic understanding of how to use it. And then how to seize the opportunity.
Well, absolutely fascinating. Are there any last things you would like to communicate to our listeners, or any last points you'd like to make before we wrap up, or are you good to go? The floor is yours.
Basically, titles are important, and first impressions are extremely important. You'd be surprised by how little people actually read into the content. After they read the title, first impressions are extremely important. And that goes to a lot of things, not just blogs. Mm-hmm. So don't underestimate the name of something or the title of something.
Would you say that's one of the biggest takeaways from this entire project for you, or?
I think it's an extremely important one. I mean, apart from AI in general, it just goes to show that your first impressions on somebody are so indicative of how they are going to perceive you. And this experiment is a good way to show that, because a lot of the content was kind of rambly, didn't make sense. But the titles and the introductions were carefully written and in such a way that it could have a good first impression on people, and I think it works. And so that goes towards a lot of things. People, a lot of times, especially engineers are the worst at this. They say none of that stuff matters. What matters is the thing that I built. And in reality, people aren't going to give you a second look unless they feel there was a good impression at the beginning. So don't underestimate the human psychology's ability to dismiss the content for first impressions. First impressions matters way more than we like to admit.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, it also matters when it comes to how certain ideas are presented, right? And I think if there's anything that we're going to need to rely on when it comes to all the catastrophic risks that our species are facing, and potential risks of which AI is definitely included in, the thing that is probably going to pull us out of the stormy seas is going to be good ideas presented in such a way that first impression, those first 10 seconds of explaining it, grip the people. There's not that massive 80% retention loss immediately after the first paragraph, right? Right. But yeah, I just want to say thank you so much for talking to us.
Yeah, thank you. This was really interesting.
Cool. Awesome. Well, thank you for having me on the podcast. I really appreciate it. You're the first. I've never been on a podcast before. So.
Oh, well, welcome to the club.
Thank you.
Absolutely good one. I would love to talk to you another time on the topic or something similar. But yeah, thank you very much for having us.
Awesome. Thanks, guys.
Yeah. All right.